This video is part of a 6-part video series on creating a landing page from scratch. So in case you haven't already, be sure to check out the other parts of the series as well. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I hope you will enjoy the following video.
Alright, so now that we thought about the general concept of the landing page and also created some low fidelity wireframes, we can now directly jump into Figma and think about the actual visual UI. So I just opened Figma here now, and what I did already was I created a frame. And what a frame basically is, it's some sort of mask that helps you to keep all of the elements you create in that specific mask. And I will show you now how this works specifically. So to create a new frame, you have to click either on A, and you can then select a frame on the right side, or you select the frame tool manually on the top left corner, and then you can drag and drop the frame tool to create a frame with a custom size. We can also just use a predefined size here, and I will do that for now. Clicking on desktop here, and now we created the first frame that we will use to work on our landing page. Once we did that, the first thing I would like to do is I want to create a layout grid that we will use throughout the whole design to keep the spacing and the alignment of the elements consistent in the design. And I create a layout grid by clicking on layout grid here, and then we will adjust that layout grid by clicking on the icon layout grid settings and changing the grid to a column grid. And I usually like to work with a 12 column grid, but it's up to you. If you prefer a different number, you can use that as well. I think 12 just works very well because it's divisible by 2, and you have more columns to use different sorts of layouts than you have with a 8 or a 6 column grid. Then we can adjust the gutter and the margin size. The gutter is the spacing between each column. So if I change this now to 30 or even to 100, you see that the spacing between each column is getting bigger. For this project I will now go for a gutter of 30 pixels, but you can of course play around and try to find the spacing that you prefer. And then we can select a margin as well. And the margin is the spacing left and right to the complete container. So if I add here 100 pixels margin, you can see that we have exactly 100 pixels on the left and 100 pixels on the right. So if we compare this, for example, to web development, this specific element would be our container, so to say, that is centered in the middle of the website. For this project I will now go with a margin of 120 because this leaves us with a container of 1200 pixels. It doesn't really matter too much because at the end of the day we would like our landing page to be responsive anyways, and it will adapt to the screen size, but I think this specific format is ideal if you want to have a general sense of how the website will look later on a desktop device. And using a MacBook, here I think the size of 1440 pixels, and then using this container size is a quite decent size to get a good preview in 100% resolution. Okay, so to create a header section, the first thing we would like to do is we select the rectangle tool by clicking here or using the shortcut R, and then we just drag and drop a mask here. I will use a size of around 600 pixels for now, and this will be our mask for the header image. Alright, so the most important thing for the header section, I would say, is actually the visual. And I already did some image research up front for images that might fit a tropical travel agency brand. And I used only royalty-free images from unsplash.com. You can check it out if you would like to, so that you can basically use all of these images as well and just play around with it yourself. And I will now just quickly skip through these images, and we will select one that might fit the header image in the best way. And what I'm looking here for specifically is an image with a lot of white space so that we can position some text on it, but which is also nice from a composition point of view, and which also features a couple, because the brand is mainly about married couples. And I think this one is quite well because it has a lot of texture to it, a very nice gradient from this orange white to the darker blue, and we will go for this for now. So I will just drag and drop it into Figma, and I can scale it down by using the scale tool, and I can scale it down by clicking K or selecting here the scale tool. And I will scale it a bit smaller. And afterwards I will transform this rectangle element that we created before to a mask. And I do that by clicking on Control and then clicking on the rectangle and then selecting here Use as Mask. And afterwards we can rename the layer to Mask, and we can create a group so that all of our elements here are basically sorted together, and I do this by clicking Command and G. And now we created a group, and we can call it header image, for example. And now I can click again on my image and I can align it, and as you can see the image stays inside the mask. And now I would like to find the right composition for my image, and I would like to show you a quick little trick here that I like to apply usually. It's called the rule of thirds, and it's very common in art and photography for composition purposes. And it's basically quite straightforward. You basically divide the image into thirds, as the name already suggests. Alright, so our total width is 1440, so we will create a rectangle with a width of 480 pixels. And our height is 600 pixels, so we will use also a third here, which is 200. If you have bigger numbers or numbers that are not that easy dividable, you can also just use the built-in calculator here. So you can type in 1400 divided by 3, and it will automatically calculate the result here. So that's also a neat little tip here. So now we created this element, and we want to position it on the top left corner, and we will then drag some rulers here. You can enable the ruler feature by clicking Shift R, and as you can see I can deactivate or activate the ruler feature this way, and we can then drag the rulers here. And we will basically do this here for the second area as well, and for the third area too. And then we will do the same thing horizontally as well. And that's basically about it. So if we now hide the header image, we can see we have now divided the image into basically 9 parts. And what we would like to do is we want to position the most important part, so the focal point of our image, at one of these points here, because that's where the eye of the user is drawn to immediately from a composition point of view. And since I would like to have my text in this area, and since I defined that in the initial wireframe, I would like to have my image focus point here. So what I will do now is I will basically adjust my image in a way that the couple is at this specific point. Alright, and I think that works quite well actually. Maybe even a bit smaller, so that we can use a bit more of the texture. This is usually, you just have to get a sense of that and you have to iterate a bit on it until you're happy with it. Before we start creating the text element here, I think we will also have to define the color palette of the brand. And since I like the tonality of this image a lot, I think we can already maybe use it as a basis for our color choices. And we can do this by first creating a random shape. I will create a circle here now for our primary color, and we can then click on the fill element here and then click on the color pick icon. And we can hover over the image and we can click on a specific color of the image that we like. So, and I like this blue here, for example. Since it's going to be a more luxury brand, I think I would like the color to be a bit darker, because that would convey some sense of authority, and also and it's also a bit more reserved maybe. And despite these primary colors, I also think we need some accent colors. So I will duplicate this circle, and I will also again click here on the color pick icon, and I will try to get this orange here, for example, or even something like this white or yellow. And then I can play around a bit based on this until I have a color that fits my purpose. And I think something that's orange could actually fit quite well with this brand. And then maybe even a not so important secondary color, which could be a bit more accent based, which we could maybe also use for background color. Alright, so I have quickly played around with the colors a bit, and I think mainly I decided to go for the same route that we already chose before, but I made this orange go into a bit more of the red direction, and I added some more brown to the white, to the initial one. And with these colors we can now continue. I think in the wireframe we already sketched a circular element which could work quite well. So I will now just copy this text and I will create a circle here, and I will try to add some sort of pattern with these circles here, so these circles could actually represent a branding pattern, for example. And when doing this, maybe also a quick tip, composition wise, it's always good to have a strong hierarchy, so different big leaps between the sizes of the circle. So in order to have a balanced composition, it makes sense to have one very big element, then one medium element, and then one very small element, rather than having 3 circles that have a very similar size. Maybe we can even add another image that is even smaller, and we can make this a bit bigger. Maybe something like this. And then we could also position the typography inside these elements. So we defined before that the name of the brand is Enkida, and we can directly use that for now. I already did some research for the typography up front, and for this project we will use the type Calendars Plus. It's a serif font from the type foundry at Tipo, and the regular font is actually free to download, and you can purchase the complete family for a price that you think fits. So it's actually very affordable and I think really good go-to font if you do not want to invest too much into typography and if you are in the beginning of your design career, for example. Okay, so we will do that now. We will write here Enkida, and I think I will go for a very big type here. So I can adjust the different values of my type here on the right side. I think we will go with the regular font for now, and we can maybe make this a bit smaller like this. And this will be our main headline. Then we need a paragraph, and I will just add some random typography here now, and I think we will use a sans serif font for the sub headline. For now we can go with Helvetica Neue, and I will adjust this also to be a bit smaller here. And from a typography point of view, it's also very similar as with the circles. You always want to aim for a strong hierarchy. Always make sure that it's really necessary. Only create a new headline size or use a new type or new family, new font weight if it's really necessary. Otherwise, always use the ones you already created. And I think for a sub-headline, something like this would be fine. And then we can also add some sort of interaction to it, so some button, for example. And we could call this button Few More. And for buttons, I like to use a paragraph font size, which is usually between 14 and 18 pixels. So now we'll go with 16. We could use our accent color for this button and maybe even use a bold font weight. And then we can select all of these elements by clicking Shift and Command, and then selecting also the circle behind that. And then we can click here on the right side on Align Horizontal Centers, and then all of the elements are centered. This I also have to think about spacing as well. And I think when it comes to spacing, I always want to have a narrow spacing for elements that belong together. So for example, the headline and the sub-headline belong together. So I can view it as some sort of block that belongs together. That's why the spacing here is not so big. But this button is a separate call to action, so it doesn't belong together. So the spacing between these two purple blocks should be a bit bigger. So once we align these elements, we can also select all of them. We can press again Command G. And once we did that, we can select again the circle element, and then we can click on Align Vertical Centers. And this way the element is also centered vertically. And once it's centered vertically, I always prefer to move the whole group around 10 or 20 pixels up, because if a element is centered geometrically 100% vertically, the eye always thinks that it's tilting a bit down. So we always want to realign it a bit higher than geometrically perfect. Okay, and I think we now already have a quite decent result. I will now fine-tune this alone, and then we will continue with the next section.
This video is part of a 6-part video series on creating a landing page from scratch. So in case you haven't already, be sure to check out the other parts of the series as well. Thanks a lot for watching this video.